Hold on to your butts.
Da-da-da. Oh, hello. Welcome to episode 95 of the Civil War Breakfast Club podcast. In the third annual Halloween Spooktacular, tonight live from the Boo Barn, I'm joined by Nightmare Fincher and our special guest, the incubus from Indiana, Jen Benson Price. I am merely a toilet paper tree named Darren. Hey, ghouls, how are you?
Toilet paper tree.
Good. How are you?
Oh, it's great. It's Halloween time. There's, nothing but costumes and candy. It's probably my favorite holiday, without a doubt. How about you guys? What's going on with you?
Yeah, how are you doing, Jen?
I have been sick with a sinus infection, but thanks to antibiotics, I'm on the mend.
Yay.
So, yeah.
All right.
But I like this time of year too.
Yeah. Oh, I definitely like this time of year. It actually came up in my Facebook memories. It was, I think, 2 years ago that we recorded our first Halloween Spooktacular.
Okay.
So.
Well, I just hope it's Halloween. I hope you avoid the light, Jen. So this is great. This is, again, we have a special guest. This is going to be a lot of fun. Again, we're talking about Halloween and the Civil War, all kinds of fun ghost stories. So whether you believe in ghosts or not, just imagine sitting by the fire telling some stories. What's great about ghost tours in these stories is there's always a lot of history built into them.
Mm-hmm.
In the stories tend to enhance them a little bit. And you notice that on ghost tours and ghost stories. So we'll have a lot of fun with this tonight. But since I'm a gracious host, and I don't forget ever, let's talk about what we're drinking. So we'll go with Jen first because she's our guest. What are you drinking?
I am actually drinking lemon lime Gatorade Zero because I'm still on antibiotics. But for the first time, I am actually drinking it out of a Civil War cup. I got a tumbler at Antietam last year, so I am drinking it out of a Battle of Antietam tumbler.
Nice.
That's awesome. What about you, Fincheru?
I am drinking Jack O by Sam Adams, and I am drinking it out of my What Would John Brown Do mug because I don't want to give away too much, but I know Jen has a story about Harper's Ferry.
Oh, okay.
She's going to be telling tonight. And that was like, we don't have any Halloween type mugs in the apartment. So that's what I went with John Brown. I'm like, well, that's close enough. So that's what I'm doing. And what are you drinking?
Excellent. Oh, thanks for asking, Mary. I really appreciate it. I'm drinking Molson Golden because I can't think of a more hideous drink on this holiday weekend. So that's what I'm drinking right now. And I'm drinking it out of my special Halloween glass with a skull on it. So I don't want to scare the kids at home, but if you're on YouTube, I apologize for the nightmare. But that's what I'm drinking. So anyway, that's be a lot of fun. So we're going to tell some stories, have some fun, and we've each researched 2 stories each to talk about in the paranormal of the Civil War. So why don't we just kind of get right to it? So Jen, you're our guest, so we'll kick it off with you and remind you, let's not scare people, like especially me, so we can try to sleep tonight. So what do you got for our first story?
Okay, so the first one is actually fitting that Mary has a John Brown mug, and you'll see why. The first one involves a gentleman, an older gentleman with a long beard who walks up and down the streets of Harper's Ferry like at dusk toward the evening, and smiles and waves at people, and sometimes he's accompanied by a little black dog. And they say he's just very friendly, very approachable, and people have stopped to take photos of him, because he looks very authentic for the time period, and they think he's a reenactor, only to get home and develop the photos or look at their camera and see a blank space where the ghost of John Brown stood for their picture, but it doesn't show up on the camera when they get it home.
Wow. That's it's creepy.
No, I can only imagine.
That's not even the scary one.
No,
that's pretty. I can't imagine that. So, yeah, obviously John Brown's got a long history in Harper's Ferry. He wasn't his best time, certainly without a doubt, as he did that. But no, there's all kinds of stories of John Brown all through that area. Not to mention that area, but also Charlestown, West Virginia, where he was executed and tried. Even up his farm at Lake Placid, New York. You can go visit his grave. That's where he's buried.
Yeah, I also read that sometimes people see him walk toward like the little engine house that's still on display there, and they say that he kind of gets to the wall and disappears.
Wow, that's... Oh my God.
Yeah, but I thought the disappearing camera one was funnier.
Yeah, no, that is funny. But it's like, if I did that and I got home, I was like, what the hell happened with that? But I have heard other people, though, just other people I've talked to about this, that they say like they'll be on some Civil War battlefield and they'll encounter people who they think are reenactors, and then it turns out they're not. that they just kind of they watch them walk away and they just like kind of disappear. So
Yeah.
I think that's
Or-
quite common. Like that's quite common around different Civil War sites.
Yeah.
Something like
And I
that.
think we shared this one a couple of years ago, but there was a story, I think it was on Haunted History, where they talked about it was at Gettysburg, and they had a bunch of foreign dignitaries, and they were on the field with a ranger, and they saw soldiers marching in formation. And when they got back to the visitor center, they're like, "Hey, thanks for the demonstration." And the rangers were like, "What are you talking about?"
Mm-hmm.
There was nothing, there was nobody, as far as they knew, there was no one in uniform on the field that day.
That would be so creepy.
Yeah.
And people hear stuff too, like drums. And I was reading one, I didn't include it tonight, but just one about at, I think it's at Chickamauga, where they'll hear, like on Snodgrass Hill, you can hear the drums still of the soldiers. And it just happens at random times.
I heard marching footsteps at Appomattox Courthouse.
Oh, you remember you told that one? I think that was our first
Yeah.
one. Yeah, that's creepy. That would be creepy.
It was weird.
No, it definitely was. Definitely was. So, Mary, you got a story?
I do. So mine is, I think I talked about Franklin last year. I think I talked about Carton House. Well, I'm going back to Franklin again this year to talk about the Lotes House, which is, it's been on the National Historic Register in Tennessee since 1976, and it's located in the downtown Franklin area. So the owner, Johann Albert Lotes, he completed the house in 1858, but he purchased the 5 acres from a man named Fountain Branch Carter in 1855. And anybody familiar with the Battle of Franklin will know the name of Carter. That's the owner of the Carter House. So they were neighbors. So Lotes was a master carpenter and piano maker, and he built the house himself. And when he built it, he made it so that it was like a model home that he could show people, like potential clients, because he was very good at architecture. So there's like 3 different styles of fireplaces in the house so that he could show people. Apparently the staircase is quite impressive because it's like this free floating black walnut wraparound handrail. It's got a post at the bottom. That's an inverted piano leg that he made. So it's a very unique structure for its time. And outside the home, he's got different hand-carved acorns. So it's quite beautiful. So he lived there with his wife, Margaret. And at the time of the battle, they're living in the house along with their 3 children, Paul, Augusta, and Matilda. And Matilda had just turned 6 years old the day before the battle. So November 30th, the day of the battle, Franklin, the Loteses, they live right across the street from the Carters, and Carter came out of the house and was like, "You need to come over here," because that was the Union line had set up right in that area. So the Loteses go over and they spend the whole battle in the basement with about 20 other people. And when they emerged, it was a really horrific sight that they saw. So their home had been damaged, but worse than that, some of the most severe fighting had taken place right outside their home. And there were bodies everywhere. Some reports say that they were like stacked like 6 feet high in some places, it was horrific. And the Lotes house would also serve as a hospital as well. So the damage is repaired and they moved back in, but in 1869, they end up having to flee Tennessee. And the story behind that, allegedly, is that he had built a piano that had an inscription on it that offended the KKK. They thought it was anti-Confederate, and they threatened to tar and feather him outside of his house. So he just quickly sold the house, left. He eventually ends up in California, settling in San Jose. Now, interesting story, his daughter Matilda went to art school there. She's one of California's premier female artists, and some of her paintings are now hanging in the Lotes home. So if you go visit it, you can see them there. So what happened to the house? It was a cooking school, a loft, retail business, apartments at one point. In 1974, it was slated for demolition, but then some people bought it, saved it, and it was basically part of the Historical Society. Eventually, it was bought by a family, and they opened it as a museum in 2008. So it's a privately owned, not-profit foundation. You can see the place where Lotes had repaired damage from the battle. You can see an indent in the floor where a cannonball landed. And because it was used as a hospital, you can also still see the bloodstains on the floor. And that's one of the ghost stories is Confederate soldiers and Union soldiers just randomly appear. And
Wow.
apparently, so the director, Thomas Cartwright, he said that since the house opened to the public in 2008, staff, volunteers, and visitors have experienced unexplainable sightings, actions, and paranormal activity. And he's actually done interviews about it on different shows. And there's different things that people have seen, like a woman crying out for a loved one. They don't know if she's like somebody who lost her husband at the Battle of Franklin. There's a little girl that stares out the window, and items get moved around randomly, and I'll get to why that is in a second. It's considered the second most terrifying place in America, according to the Travel Channel. But as I said, there's stories of Confederate soldiers that appear randomly in the house. The woman that she is looking for probably her husband. But the one part is that the Lotz family, before the Battle of Franklin, it was not even a year before, they lost 2 children, twins, that died unexpectedly. One story says they drowned. Another story says that they drank poisoned water. And so they passed away. And the staff at the house believe that it is those children that do a lot of the haunting there, that they move stuff around. Visitors get their pant legs grabbed. They're very mischievous. They can sometimes hear giggling and stuff. But they think those are the primary haunts there. But I have to say the Lotz house, I definitely want to go visit it. They do ghost tours, evening ones there this time of year. They do a lot of different tours. They do a woman's history based tour as well. So it's a really good historic site to visit. And I mean, I just stumbled upon it because just was looking around for ghost stuff. And I thought it was a really cool story because the house has a really interesting history behind it with the Battle of Franklin, and it kind of gets away from that Carter house, the Carton house as well, and telling another part of the battle. And that's where some of the most horrific fighting was. So that is my first ghost story, is the Lotz house in Franklin, Tennessee. So if you find yourself there, like I said, it's privately owned. It's beautiful. They've got amazing exhibits there, and there's so many different tours you can do there. But it is definitely considered to be a very haunted Civil War place.
Yeah, I'd imagine there's quite a bit of stuff going on around Franklin, Tennessee. I'd imagine that seems to be a place that
last year I told about,
a lot of stuff was going on. Yeah,
told about Claiborne's ghost being there last year outside Carton House, that he sometimes will talk to visitors about if it's time for the battle or not, and then he rides off.
Yeah, I mean, you never know, right? And what's cool about it is you study these stories, you find out these little details, and I couldn't imagine nothing scary than the ghosts of children outside that, right?
Yeah, that's what freaked me out about it was, and see, they don't really talk about that too many places. And then I came across it on one website that they'd had these twins that died, and apparently it was like in early 1864, the Union Army was there, and they cut down a bunch of trees, and they apparently might have done something to the water that the kids drank.
Oh,
which is pretty scary. So I think we're on to you for a ghost story now.
Yeah. Well, speaking of children, my first ghost story here is a popular one, and that is the story of the orphanage at Gettysburg. And this is a popular one. A lot of people know this one, but some background about the orphanage. It was opened on November 20th of 1866. It's right there on Baltimore Street in Gettysburg. The purpose was to house and clothe and educate the countless orphans that were caused by the Civil War. And the building is rumored to be the former headquarters of Oliver Otis Howard during the battle. I don't know if you knew that, but that's been debated or not. U.S. Grant, he wasn't at the battle, but he was photographed outside of it around 1867. So it was a famous place in the town. When it opened, it housed 22 children, 12 boys, and 10 ghouls. And by 1868, there were 60 orphans in the property. Initially, the staff, they were real caring and everything ran really smoothly. They were fed well, they were treated well. But as time went on, the staff slowly drifted away to different jobs, including the head mistress, who took a management position at the DQ on Steinway, so she left. So her replacement was a woman from Philadelphia named Rosa Carmichael. Now, Carmichael was nothing like her predecessor. I mean, she was a disciplinarian. She was probably the type of person who gave out pennies on Halloween, just a miserable, miserable soul. She had a perverse imagination on doling out punishment to these children who their ages ranged from just 5 years old to 13. Now, her punishment methods really were more torture than punishment. For example, she placed children in large buckets of freezing water. She tied them to split rail fences in the backyard for the entire day.
Oh my God.
Good or bad weather. She locked them for an entire day inside the outhouse. And she also had an assistant that the children referred to as the stick boy, who helped enforce these penalties. Guess what they called him the stick boy?
Because he carried a stick.
Because he hit him with a stick.
Oh,
That's
God.
not a trick question. That's what they called him. That's what he was. Now, needless to say, Rosa Carmichael was meaner and angrier than a Yankee fan in October. That's how miserable this woman was. And so she ruled the orphanage with a steel fist. And her ultimate punishment involved the basement of the house. So when a child was especially bad by her standards, the child was brought into the basement. It was a dark and dusty and scary place that you can still visit today, by the way. The kids call it the dungeon. And in the back of it had a little separate nook, and they called it the pit. Now, to prevent kids from escaping, they were all shackled to the wall with chains, usually for days at a time. And when they cried, the kids upstairs could hear the kids screaming. So it almost acted like an incentive to behave by hearing your friends tortured in the basements. Some of these kids, by the way, were 5 years old. That's this is the age we're talking about of these poor kids. The abuse went on for years, and the people of Gettysburg were completely oblivious to what Rosa Carmichael was doing to these orphans. Now, since the orphanage was a public institution, nobody was allowed on the property unless you had written permission to go on. But it was rumored and was believed by many that Carmichael had killed some of these children either accidentally or on purpose, but there was never any real evidence to kind of prove it. One day, a 16-year-old kid who happened to be locked in the outhouse for the day in December was discovered by some neighbors, and they were shocked at what they saw. So neighbors did what neighbors do, and they flapped their mouths, and the word got around to what Carmichael was doing. So ultimately, she gets arrested, and she gets hauled to the courthouse and put on trial for child abuse and neglect. They find her guilty, but guess what her penalty is? She's fined $20. That's her penalty, $20 fine.
Oh my God.
And when she got back, and they let her go back to the orphanage. Now, she went back and she was pissed because why? Some of these children were some of the kids who were called witnesses to her trial. And they sent her back with these kids. And the town folk were pissed at this decision. So they literally took torches and marched in a mob to the orphanage. And they literally chased her out of town. And she was never heard from again. And so basically, she disappeared from history. Soon later in 1877, the orphanage was in huge debt, and it was forced to close, and the children were either adopted or spread around to different foster homes in the area. And the building was basically turned into what it is today, which is an apartment complex, as well as a gift shop, and it's got a ghost shop in there as well. So the children in Carmichael, they're long gone. Or are they? So according to many, the spirits of these children and even this head mistress herself are still there, making their presence known to those who visit. Visitors to the orphanage now, they say they hear little children's cries from the basement, as well as laughter from children as well. There's sounds of kids running up and down the stairs and on the floor. On several occasions, there are full apparitions of two young girls dressed in tattered rags. And they just stare at you. And if you've seen The Shining, nope, you don't want that, right? But that's what was going on with this. So there was sounds of those rattling shackles that we could hear from the basement. And there was even a sighting of the angry Rosa Carmichael from the window that she was staring out. So if you've been to the orphanage, there's definitely, I don't know if you guys have been there or not, but there is a definite feeling of just overwhelming despair when you're in there, especially in that basement. And if you visit, you can still see the original shackles and the chains on the basement walls. And you can imagine, it's a very easy thing to go through in your mind, the sheer terror felt by these poor kids doled out to them at the hands of this evil Rosa Carmichael. And it's not a Civil War story, but it's a famous one in Gettysburg to this day. You can go and visit it, and you can tour it. And if you go there, it's one of those places it's thick. You can just feel the energy. And no one ever knew really what happened to old Rosa. She took off and she disappeared from the planet. But her ghost, if you believe that, is still there today with all these kids of who are really made miserable by her presence. So that's my first story. So if you go there and you check it out, it's definitely worth checking out because it's something that you really, if you go to Gettysburg and you're into that type of thing, go because you'll feel it. You will.
Yeah, you've been on that tour, right, Jen?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. I remember you talking about that with the toys, how they would
Yeah,
sometimes.
there was a table full of toys down there, and we were rolling a ball, and it rolled kind of, excuse me, kind of into the pit area
Yeah.
and stopped for a minute and then rolled back. So it
Oh,
wasn't like it paused, like it got up to the top of the hill. It actually stopped for a minute, like somebody was holding it, and then it came back to the people. But yeah, that was, it is a sad place, but it kind of made me feel better when we went downstairs and people had started leaving toys for the kids
yeah.
and things like that. There was a table full of things they could play with and stuff like that.
Aw.
There was a story somebody had told me, and that somebody had left a doll, and when the person came back the next day, the doll's arms and legs were broken off,
Ooh,
and they
so
think
Rosa got that one.
was this the ghost of Rosa taking punishment on one of the kids again by destroying their toys? And
Yeah.
who knows? That's what's cool about it. Is you never really know. But there are a lot of places in that town or a lot of these towns in the Civil War where you can feel the energy. You know, whether there's ghosts or not, that's up to you. But there's definitely energy, positive and
Mhm.
negative.
Oh,
And there's
yeah.
no question there's negative energy at the orphanage at Gettysburg.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
That's creepy.
Yeah, yeah. Good luck with that one, especially kids. No, scary. No,
Yeah.
nope. All right. So, Jen, you got another story? What do you got?
I do. It's another Harper's Ferry story. And this one actually involves one of the five African Americans that was part of John Brown's raid.
Yep.
And I'm going to give a little bit of background on the story because it explains why he was there. But he was a freed Black named Dangerfield Newby, born in 1820. His mother was a slave woman who was owned by someone who apparently didn't care that much what she did because she had several children with a local white farmer. And anyway, so long story short, they all ended up, I want to say they were in Ohio for a while, but then they went back toward Virginia or some that area. And along the way, Dangerfield had met an enslaved woman and they had several children together. So he was still freed and he was working as a blacksmith trying to raise the money to buy his family.
Mm-hmm.
And about the time that this was coming up, he had tried raising the money and tried to get the guy to negotiate the price down, and the guy wouldn't budge on it. He wanted $1,000 for the family, which in those days would be like almost 30,000 today.
Yeah.
So, this poor man had gotten to like $750 for the time and was trying to negotiate. Can I pay you the rest? And while he's trying to raise all this money, his wife is saying, you got to hurry. They're going to sell us to Louisiana and then we'll never see you. So when someone introduced him to John Brown, he was like, okay, this is my only chance because this guy's not going to budge. So now I'm just going to join this guy and I can free my family that way. So he was at the Kennedy farm helping plan and everything like that. And then on the day of the actual raid, he was kind of on the perimeter.
Mm-hmm.
And he was being approached by townspeople to try to figure out what was going on. Well, him and the other soldier were firing and they hit somebody. So a sniper I think it's the corner of Shenandoah and High Street. There's like a building right there. And they said at the time it was like a house. And they think a sniper from the second story window shot Dangerfield Newby. But the thing is, this guy didn't have bullets. He used a 6-inch railroad spike and got him in the neck.
Oh my God.
And that's not even the worst part of the story. This just makes me so sad. But because he was kind of on the front lines, and he was the first person with John Brown's group to get shot or killed. And they said he died pretty quickly, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But after that, like the townspeople were mutilating his body, taking souvenirs. And then they threw him into what is now Hog Alley.
Mm-hmm.
excuse me, what is now Hog Alley in Harper's Ferry. And they said, like, one hog went up and kind of looked at him, and then a few minutes later, that was what was left of him, went to the hogs, literally went to the hogs.
Oh my God.
So the story we heard is that you can still see him walking down Hog Alley. And some people say that you can still see the injury. The story they told us in Harper's Ferry when we were there is that, like, some people have seen him with the railroad spike still, like, on his throat.
Oh my God.
But they say he's just one of the, they say he's, I don't think he's actively trying to harm people,
Mhm.
but they say he is definitely one of the scariest things, like the scariest ghost you'll see in Harper's Ferry. And something else that they had told us, if you want to get him to show up, you walk down Hogs Alley whistling the song Dixie. And I couldn't do it. I was like, I am not going to torment this poor man. He's been
Yeah.
through enough. But other people tried it. And I don't know if he showed up for people that night, but I always get an eerie feeling walking down that little street. So,
Oh my God. That is
yeah.
sad and scary.
Yeah. And I was going to do a quick book plug because I know
Yes.
everybody here likes to read. I got a lot of Dangerfield Newby's background. After I heard that story at Harper's Ferry, I got a lot of his background from the book Five for Freedom by Eugene L. Meyer. It's this.
Oh, cool. Okay.
And if you want the background of the African Americans who were with John Brown and like what they were, why they were there, and how it went for all of them, it's an amazing book. It really is good.
Oh, that sounds. I've never heard of that one
Yes.
before, so that's cool.
Yeah. So Five for Freedom.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Wow, that's
But
a scary, sad story.
I warned it. I warned you.
Yeah, that. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to do that 1 second. I wanted to get the funny one, and then,
Yeah.
but yeah, that, like, reading that book after like hearing what this man had gone through, and then hearing that he still haunts a place, it was just, I have a soft spot for him. I just feel
Oh, yeah.
so bad.
Yeah, I don't think I could whistle Dixie and
I've
try to
never
get
been
him
able
to.
to. No. If he's there, I'm just like, hey, just passing by. I hope you're having a good day. You know, that I can't torment someone who's been through what that man went through.
Yeah, that's
It
terrible.
was good of a day you can with having a railroad spike stuck in your throat, I suppose. You know, but
Oh,
ugh,
Yeah,
that's
point taken.
well, but you know what though, when you hear these stories like that, yeah, the ghost story is scary, but you think of just the experience of what, put yourself in that spot, seeing him take that injury, and just what people can do to each other in acts of war and violence. It's just a scary thing when you think about it. And again, it leaves the energy behind, so it's no surprise that stuff still gets felt when you
Yeah.
go to a place like that. I don't know if I'm whistling Dixie in Hog Alley. I don't know if I'm gonna be doing that.
no.
I do know that I saw a lady screaming when she had to wait for a table at Harvest Ferry one time. That was scary. I will say that. So
Oh,
I don't
yeah,
need
you're
somebody with
referring
a
to me.
railroad spike in their throat. No, I will never in a million years. But that's a pretty scary place.
Yeah.
Oof, God.
But I think too that goes back to, like, I mean, I love the ghost tours because I'm into the whole ghost thing. But the other reason I love the ghost tours as well is because you hear a history you wouldn't normally hear.
That's why I like them.
Yeah, and someone said on Twitter that they like them because it gets people into history that might not be into history. They might not do a normal history tour, but they might be willing to be like, oh, I'll go on a ghost tour, and they learn something and they find it interesting. Like, would we know of the gentleman you talked about if it, like, he should be on another tour, like a normal history tour, but because his ghost is in Harper's Ferry, apparently that's where people learn about him. But
Yeah, that's where I first heard of him, and then I found the book through a friend.
Yeah.
But it was on the ghost tour that I first heard that story.
yeah, and that's why the ghost tours are good, because you learn a different type of history. You learn about the history of the town. You learn about something that you might not on, if you're learning about a battle, you might not hear that kind of thing. You learn about the town that you're visiting.
Well, most ghost tour stories are intensely personal in their design, and you're sharing someone's experiences. And it's not talking about battle formations or politics or things like that. You're talking about an individual, what they experienced. And you can almost feel the injury in your mind when you hear the stories. And you wonder what was he thinking? And at that moment, did he regret being there? And it's really that grassroots level of history that these tours really provide to you. That's why they're important to go on. And it's not so much for the ghost thing, but it's that individual history. in Gettysburg, they have that post-battle tour that you can go on. And it's off Steinway. It's promoted as kind of a ghost tour, but they tell you about the post situation in the town, what the townsfolk had to put up with, and how it smelled and how long it
Mhm.
lasted for. And it's pushed as a paranormal tour to get people in there, but you learn immensely about that post battle and what it must have been like. And it's just another way to study history. And that's what's
Yeah.
great about them. They really, really are.
Yeah. And I got to say kudos to the people that do those tours, because they have to do just as much research as,
Mhm.
someone doing a tour at a museum or, on a battlefield. I think like it's maybe a little bit of a different type of research, but it's still researching history, and you have to know it, and you have to, they're not just making the stuff up. It comes from somewhere.
Yeah.
Gettysburg had ghost stories before the battle. That's one thing we've mentioned on here before. And I think it's a fascinating way to learn about history of different areas, no matter where you're visiting.
Well, speaking of ghosts, Mary, I know where you're going with your next story.
Oh, yeah. Well, we just did an episode about the gray ghost. So, John Mosby. So, I found a ghost story. I just stumbled upon it accidentally about possibly one of Mosby's rangers that is a ghost in Virginia. So, kind of a bit of a backstory. So, Mosby's men are said to haunt certain areas in Virginia where Mosby and his rangers were. So back in August 1864, you have Phil Sheridan going into the valley, and Mosby and his men capture and burn a Union supply train near Berryville, and that really pisses Sheridan off, and that's when he starts on his whole, basically he was going to do it anyway, but that really fired him up to like, let's total war, burn the valley. Um, so and Mosby's men, a lot of them hailed from that area, so they were taking personally what Sheridan was doing. Like they're from Virginia, and he's there burning, he's burning the valley. And so anyway, flash forward to Front Royal, Virginia, where some of Mosby's men are killed by Sheridan, and I think it was Custer who was involved
Like Custer, yeah.
as well. Two are hung for our shot, including a young boy who we discussed. Darren discussed that in the episode we did about John Mosby. In retaliation to this, Mosby kills 3 of Sheridan's men. And after that, there's no more killing on either side of the men. They're treated like prisoners of war. Now, Front Royal was originally called Helltown when it was first settled. So beginning in 1870 and appearing every 6 years until around 1925, there's a weird apparition that the locals called Whirlaway. It's a violent outburst of wind shrieking through the field and forest, and then an apparition appears, not for very long, and it's first as a silver green light, and then from this, apparently, a figure emerges of a man wearing a plain gray jacket and trousers with a visored kepi shading his eyes. And he's surrounded by a shining silver glow, and it looks like he's underwater. So it's a very weird kind of apparition. And he moves quickly, almost as much as you see him for a second, and then he disappears. So the last time Whirlaway was seen was in 1925, and he caused quite a ruckus in the area of Front Royal. So Mrs. Cook and her daughters are out one day. They're down near the river, and all of a sudden it got really windy. And they knew the story of Whirlaway, so they took off and started running, and because they could also hear the sound of heavy boots behind them on the gravel road. So they ran to their house, they bolted the doors, and Whirlaway just went from, like, he stayed outside, but one into the house, back and forth all afternoon, just apparently terrorizing them. And then he went across the river and apparently did it elsewhere. Whirlaway apparently has not been seen since 1925, and they don't know if he finally was like at peace somehow, but there's a few different origin stories for him. One of them is that he was a man that was looking to join Mosby's Rangers, a young man from Front Royal, and Sheridan's men found him, killed him, and dumped him in the river. That's one backstory. The other backstory is that he is one of Mosby's Rangers, because Mosby's Rangers apparently dressed very plainly in just gray, and they would have lived with the locals, so they would be familiar with the area. And we all know Mosby's Rangers like to ride around really quick, and they would disappear. That's why Mosby was called the Gray Ghost. Whatever his story, Whirl Away has not been seen since 1925, but it's still something that is talked about in the area. But I just found it really interesting. And the other one to that is sometimes hunters still hear Mosby's men riding up and down the roads. Like in Fairfax and the area that he was in, they can hear like the spurs and stuff, and there's nothing else around, but they can hear like the sounds of the spurs, the horses' hooves, and just like the sounds that you would associate with cavalry riding around near you. It's now, I tried to find a story to see if Mosby's ghost was anywhere, but apparently the gray ghost is not a ghost.
Oh, that would be kind of, redundant.
Oh yeah, but I thought Whirl Away, I don't know, reading that really freaked me out just because of how he would like appear, just this strong shrieking wind and the sound of heavy boots, and then this weird light, and then it's like this apparition where everything's swirling around him and it looks like he's underwater, but you can see just for a split second he's got the gray kepi and the gray clothes on, and he just went around kind of terrorizing.
Can't they all just be like Casper and be nice? Can't they all? I mean, my God, it's so much to ask.
No.
Seriously, so rude. But that is definitely a scary story. It definitely is.
It was one I'd never heard it before, and I thought it was just really interesting.
Hey, how do you guys feel about embalmed bodies?
About what?
Embalmed bodies. You guys like that? Is that pretty cool stuff?
No.
Well, I got a story for you then. Okay, we're going to talk about some embalmed bodies here. Okay, so as the Civil War goes on, it spurred a lot of towns on the map that we know of today: Gettysburg, Sharpsburg, Fredericksburg, and one that became really popular after the battles of South Mountain and Antietam is the town of Frederick, Maryland. We've been there many times. It's a great little place. After the Battle of Antietam, the town of Frederick, the population flooded by over 8,000 wounded soldiers, which doubled the town's population. 27 buildings in the town were made into field hospitals, and the town's popularity really, really took off because everybody knew the town of Frederick. Because these hospitals, they were embedded journalists there from the New York Times, the Philadelphia Inquirer, and they were all reporting to readers nationally and internationally about what the goings on of these hospitals in this tiny town of Frederick. And they say necessity is the mother of all invention, Marion, if you've heard that before. But it also, but what it does, it serves basically a morbid purpose, which is the dying in these hospitals. Frederick became the hub of embalming in the country at this point, okay? Frederick, for the most part, was also the hub of a coordinated military hospital system that was organized by Dr. Jonathan Letterman. Everybody knows him from Gettysburg, right? For his triage system. And the influx of recovering soldiers and motivated entrepreneurs led to a spike in crime in the town. It added to the hospital misery. Not only we get people in the hospital for battle, people are getting attacked and knifed and they're going back in the hospital. It kind of turned into a wild town. And before the war, for the most part, people didn't travel that much. They tended to die where they lived, and that's kind of how it worked. Now, with countless soldiers dying in towns far away, this embalming process in this business became booming. So throw in the fact that the railroad companies would not allow a dead body on the train unless it was embalmed. So you kind of had to. It became a popular and a necessary process. So embalming became a lucrative process as well as a macabre one, as they say, right? Embalmers were fetching $100 a corpse at this point. And in an embalming shop in Washington, D.C., embalmers were taking the bodies of unknown dead and embalming them, putting them in windows to display as an advertisement for future embalmers.
What?
That was the industry. So it was really, really sketchy, but that's what was going on. One of the more popular embalming buildings in Frederick was located at 48 East Patrick Street and owned by a guy named James Whitehall. And he was running the property originally as a furniture store. Furniture makers, for the most part, were in the undertaking business because they were used to building coffins. They had the wood, they had the supplies, and they can get $7 a coffin. So it was extra business for them. One of the embalmers that Whitehall employed was a guy named Dr. Richard Burr. And he happily advertised that he was embalming bodies at this East Patrick Street address. If you've seen the picture of the embalmer, it's a famous Civil War picture. You see the guy under the blanket,
Yep.
and the guy standing up. That's Burr. That's him. Okay, so Burr was a sleaze. He was a scumbag. He stole money from grieving families and took advantage of people, really to make the money off of the dead as he could. There was one time there was a body delivered. He embalmed it. His name, the father's name was Timothy Dwight, and the father comes to retrieve the body of his son, and Burr won't let him have the body unless he pays him $100 because he embalmed it without permission. He just embalmed it. Said, "You want your kid back? $100." So we kind of held him
Oh
ransom.
my God.
So that's kind of how it was, and so we kind of held the family ransom with that. These embalmers were ghouls, like literally and figuratively. Many of these guys followed the army around. They passed out business cards to the men before going into battle for future services. Not surprisingly, generals such as U.S. Grant, they banned them from hanging around the army because he called them vultures. Burr himself was banned by George Meade after Gettysburg for doing the same thing. That's what these guys did,
Oh
right?
my God.
So now the property at 48 East Patrick Street that handled all these embalmings ended up being a mortuary for about 100 years. And in 1996, it became the National Museum of Civil War Medicine, which still remains to this day. That's the building that they're in. And according to people who worked there, especially during the renovations that took place in 1998, strange things afoot at the Circle K started happening in this building. So workmen who were doing the renovations refused to go to certain parts of the building by themselves. They heard the voice of children in rooms that they know didn't exist. Many of the staff reported seeing a woman dressed in a long gray Victorian dress on the third floor of the museum, as well as incidents where lights would go on and off by themselves. So it was a spooky place. On a handful of occasions on the security camera, an apparition of man would show up. He would appear, then disappear right on the film. And visitors would feel people brush by them. They'd get pushed, they'd get bumped while they're looking at the exhibits in this place. So it's hardly a surprise that a building was kind of such a gruesome past would hold so much energy that we talked about before. But fortunately, the National Museum of Civil War Medicine, as well as that orphanage in Gettysburg, they're really both there to be toured today, and they both offer ghost tours as well. But yeah, a lot of people, if you go to the National Museum of Civil War Medicine in Frederick, that building has a real history. It's a 100-year mortuary full of embalming. And if you look into the process of what these embalmers did, people talk about the media chasing them around, but these guys were literally ghouls preying on the dead and families to make money because they knew they couldn't get the body home if they were far away without being embalmed, and they got $100 a pop for this. So it's just another level of just a crappy humanity that floated around these people that you had to deal with in this war. That is just something that people don't always think about. You know,
Oh.
Richard Burr he was one that you know where he's buried, Mary? He's buried in Philly at Laurel Cemetery, by the way.
Oh, where Meade is.
Yeah. He's ironically he got kicked out of the army by Meade at Gettysburg. He's buried right around the corner from him. So how you doing? Hopefully Meade is slapping him around.
Oh my
You
God.
know. But that's the process of what this was, and it really put the town of Frederick on the map because that those 27 hospitals that were built in the national notoriety it came because of Jonathan Letterman. So if you never know, go to the museum. You might see something. You
That's
might see something
interesting.
more than just a couple of medicine tubes and some
Yep.
medical tools. So yeah, so that's what's great about these stories is every one of them has a history behind them. And all these stories, there's a genesis to them that created the stories. And
Mhm.
sometimes learning those stories is just as interesting as studying any of these battles or any of these people, because this is real history. This is the stuff that you learn about, and it just makes you cringe. And people have been taking advantage of people for as long as it's been people, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's a good one.
That is a good one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I had no idea
So
about that.
enjoy if you go to Frederick. Not just those rooftop bars, Mary, you
No.
like to go to, but there's other places you can go in Frederick and see some of that stuff. But go to the museum and you can check it out. You can ask the staff; they'll probably tell you all about it. You can take a ghost tour of the place too. They'll let you tour the place and they'll tell you the stories as well.
That's really cool.
That is cool.
Yeah, it's creepy. I mean, I always wondered who that like. I've seen that embalming photo many times, and
Yeah.
wouldn't it be
Yeah, all the
ironic if
medical
you?
stuff gives
Oh, sorry. Go
all
ahead,
the
Jen.
medical stuff gives me the
Oh,
willies.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry about that.
Oh no, I can't. Like, I get
Well, you think of the
ugh.
famous story with Abraham Lincoln's son
Yeah,
with the embalmer, where he was, and Lincoln himself was embalmed so many times, but Willie, he dies, and Abe was reportedly he went at least 2 occasions to visit him and open his coffin up in the tomb to see him. After he had died, and he was a very spiritual guy anyway.
yeah,
But this embalming process helped. I guess it helped people grieve in a lot of different ways. There's that story of George Lamb Willard at Gettysburg we've talked
yeah.
about, where he gets killed at Gettysburg. He gets hit in the back of the head or the shoulder area with a shell and blows the whole side of his face off. And they tried to embalm him and they couldn't because the stuff came right out of his veins, out of his neck. But the parents insisted, his family insisted on an open coffin. And so by the time he got back home, he wasn't in the best shape. So they put him in a glass coffin, and they put a flag over half of his face to cover the injury.
Oh,
And that's kind of how the whole death process was at this time. Bombers really were really, this his history of bombing really begins the Civil War.
yeah,
And there's all kinds of stories of this, and just hearing how they would chase these guys around just to make a buck with this it's a real lecherous part of society. If you really think about it. No offense to bombers out there nowadays, because I know them. But back in the day, no thanks.
That's almost what I did as a career, as a funeral director.
That's about right.
Yeah,
That's
almost
about right.
decided not to.
No, that's a good.
Yeah, that's a good one too. Like, that's interesting history. It would be really ironic if Burr was the guy that embalmed Meade. If they were
who knows?
Philly.
You never know. He could have been. I mean, he was Burr was a famous one. He did a lot of people. That's a good question. I didn't even think about that. So, but perhaps he did. Who knows if Meade was even embalmed? Who knows if he was? But it certainly is the case. So I think Halloween's a great holiday. There's many stories like this that we've talked about, a lot of fun ones to be discovered too. So don't be afraid of taking ghost tours, because ghost tours is just another history. It's another way to study history. It's at a much more personal level. Doesn't mean you got to believe in ghosts. You don't have to worry about ghosts coming out of your TV at night and spooking the family. But it's one of those things where it just gives you a different type of studying to read this stuff, and take it for a grain of salt. Have fun with it. Everyone loves those campfire ghost stories, but behind every ghost story, there's a real history story.
Yeah,
and you can learn a lot of cool stuff by taking these ghost stories.
Yeah. I'd really recommend the Farnsworth house basement tour. It's kid friendly, but it's really good. It's a little creepy, but it's a really good one. And I know they do more adult ones as well. But I think a lot of these little Civil War towns have the ghost stories, and if they don't have the ghost tours, but if they don't have the ghost tours, look for a town history, because odds are they've got a ghost story associated with them. Like, I found the one about Mosby's Rangers. There's Harper's Ferry. We talked last year about Perryville, about we nicknamed the horse Mr. Dead.
Yeah.
Claiborne's horse that still gallops up and down the road at Perryville. They all have these stories associated with them, and as silly as a ghost story might seem, they're rooted in history, and they're part of the battle, or just part of the life there. And often the locals will know the stories too.
It certainly is. Well, any final words from you, Fincheru?
No, well, thank you to Jen for joining us again for our third annual.
Thank you guys for having me.
Yes, those great stories.
Good job.
And you're a trooper, because I know what sinus infections are like. They're not fun.
Yeah, sorry I had to mute myself and cough a few times, but I made it.
Don't worry about it. No, you
I
did
made
awesome.
it.
You did
You
awesome.
did it. You did it. So, Mary, what's coming up for us?
Well, we have to sit down and talk about that for upcoming episodes. But on November the 17th, we will be having, you can say his name because I will butcher it.
His name is Cal Schoonover.
Cal Schoonover on to talk about his book, Wisconsin at Antietam. So that'll be.
I've read. It's a good one.
Yeah,
and he's a good dude, good solid Red Sox fan, although he likes Notre Dame, which is unacceptable. But for the most part, he wrote a really good book about Wisconsin and Antietam. Everybody knows the Wisconsin regiments, So we're going to talk about them. He'll be joining us on the 17th. So if you're interested in joining us, feel free to shoot us an email at info@civilwarbreakfastclub.com. And Mary will respond back to you and send you the information. So hopefully we get a lot of people. If you haven't read the book, it's totally okay. You can come on and listen to him talk about it. Ask him questions, whatever you like to do. You know the drill if you've been on this before. If you haven't, definitely jump on. It's not your grandfather's book club where we sit there and read chapter and verse. We just talk about the book. We've had a lot of cool people on in the past. And soon, Mary, I don't know if you know this, we're going to be announcing next year's book club.
We are.
And it's in process. We can't divulge any state secrets just yet. But suffice it to say, there's going to be some cool people joining us next year. We think people are going to really like it.
We're really looking forward to it.
All right. So I guess we could finish this off here so we can head off into the jump on our brooms and fly into the moonlight and head off into the night. So off we go again. Thank you for listening, everybody. Thank you so much to the great Jen Price for joining us yet again. And we look forward to the Spooktacular Part IV next year. We'll be talking about that when we talk about more stories of the Civil War and the paranormal. Anyway, thanks for listening, everybody. We appreciate it. Our live is Saturday at 10 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Join us. Have a great Halloween if we don't talk to you. And we look forward to seeing you all on the other side.
See you guys later.
Peace out.
Bye, guys.
Bye.